Okay, so we're going to go over some of the parts of the brain today that'll be on your practicals. All right. Hey, look at that, it's working. Okay, so these are things we went over yesterday. We went over the brain and as part of the central nervous system. We went over the brainstem, the cerebellum. We went over the diencephalon. These are the pictures that I drew on the board yesterday. But today I'm going to use I'll just use the PowerPoint like I'm doing here and show you these in the actual brain. Cranial nerves, we'll talk a little bit more about those. There's 10 pairs that arise from the brainstem, and the other 2 right from the brain. So we've got CN1, CN2, the olfactory nerve, and the optic nerves on there. And chat screen's open over here if you need to talk to me about anything on there. All right, so here, let's see, gotta get this guy down there. All right, so there's your brain, there's your spinal cord. We did the spinal cord already. We did some work on that. Brain and cranial nerves, we looked at this yesterday. So this is your olfactory nerve. There's your optic nerve. Your optic chiasm is there. It's where it crosses over. And your optic tracts are back here. Okay, so these are the main parts of the brain, the 4 major portions of the brain. So we've got the cerebrum, which is the main part of it. That's all this guy here, right? That's all cerebrum here. Okay, that's all cerebrum. So we've got the cerebrum, the cerebellum, which we talked about as muscle memory, movement memory, learning physical behaviors, movements. The diencephalon, we talked about that yesterday. We talked about the diencephalon consisting of the thalamus, the epithalamus, the hypothalamus, the subthalamus, and then the midbrain here. Midbrain's right here, and the midbrain. Did we talk about that? So that's visual reflex auditory center, and then the pons right here. And the pons is more or less a pass-through area for nerves, but there's sleep in there. There's something called the reticular formation that's in there. That's your sleep-wake cycles, right? So whether or not you're conscious. And then the medulla oblongata, really important structure there. That's breathing, heart rate, blood vessel dilation, things like that. Okay, so here's your nerves, your cranial nerves, and we'll get into these later on in the chapter. Towards the end of the slideshow, we'll get into the specific ones. But this is just kind of showing you where these are. So we've got olfactory, which is cranial nerve 1, cranial nerve 2, optic, oculomotor, trochlear. But you guys did some work with these on your last lab, on your reflex lab. I think you guys had to define some of these on there. So you got a little background with that. So here's your brain. Now listen, I know this brain picture is not as good as my drawing, but this is the mid-sagittal section of the brain. This is the human brain. When we do the sheep brain, you'll see a couple of things that are different. So for us, the foramen magnum down here, right, is below. It's caudal to all of these structures. But for a sheep, it's caudal, but that's different, right? It's back here, right? So their heads face forward. So this structure, the medulla oblongata, for example, is going to be back here. So this whole structure here, right, is going to be swung out this way on the sheep brain. Okay, but a lot of the structures are the same. So many of the structures are the same, just they're oriented a little bit different. So we got the corpus callosum up here. You remember those are commissural fibers allowing right to left communication. And then we've got the fornix down here, and the fornix is very important. The fornix allows front to back communication, specifically the hippocampus to the hypothalamus. So the hippocampus, like the mammillary bodies, to the hypothalamus. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. Okay, let's see what else we got here. So here's the brain and how it sits in the skull. So we've got our corpus callosum, septum pellucidum separating the lateral ventricles, so the first and second ventricle, and then there's a hole that goes through the fornix, and that's called interventricular foramen, interventricular between the ventricles foramen hole, right? And then that goes down to this, and that's the cerebral aqueduct, and the cerebral aqueduct goes down here to the third ventricle, and the third ventricle goes down here into the fourth ventricle, right? So that's the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. Yesterday we talked about also the choroid plexus being in here, and the choroid plexus is made up of epidermal cells, which produce the cerebral spinal fluid. Okay. So what else can we see here? This right here, we talked about this yesterday. This is the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland, that's the master endocrine gland. Very important hormone function. And it's attached to the rest of the brain by a stalk called the infundibulum. Infundibulum. Now, all these words are on your sheet there. Okay, all these words are on your sheet there. Okay, let's see. So let's just keep on rolling here. So this is your brain stem, medulla oblongata here, pons right here, and then midbrain's above that. The reticular formation, so this is really kind of neat. We'll talk about this more. I'd like to do that one on the board. It's really interesting. That's your sleep-wake cycle, and that's responsible for, what's that called when you can't quite, sleep paralysis. That's responsible for sleep paralysis. That's right there. Cerebellum, so all these are defined for you really concisely here, really nice. So motor skills, the diencephalon, thalamus, subthalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus, and the cerebrum, right? So those are all the things we talked about and all their definitions there. We've talked about more than that, but this is a lot of it in a nutshell. The basal nuclei, and you'll be able to see this. So nuclei is a collection of nerve cells, a collection of nerve bodies inside the central nervous system, right? Outside of the central nervous system, we said that a collection of cell bodies was called a ganglion. Inside, it's called a nucleus. Okay, it's called a nucleus. Okay, the limbic system. The limbic systems are like, like guttural responses, right? Like you smell something bad and you're like, right? That's your limbic system. Okay, where you smell something good and you start slobbering like a Pavlov dog. Right? So emotion, mood, memory, that's all your limbic system. Okay? Okay. Basal nuclei. So the basal nuclei, so when you're sitting there not really doing anything, this creates kind of like IPSPs and prevents your body from just, twitching around. Okay, that's your basal nuclei. So right here, largely inhibits unintended movement when at rest. Okay? So this and the thalamus, these are the targets for things like deep brain stimulation, which we'll talk about later on. Okay, I'm going to skip over development of the central nervous system. You guys can look over that. So this is a notochord. A notochord is, we're chordates, right? So some things that all chordates have in common are a notochord, a dorsal nerve cord, so the notochord is going to become our vertebral column, a notochord, which is going to become your spinal cord, and then a pharyngeal pouch and a postanal tail. Those are all things that all chordates have in common. So if you look at a very early developing chicken, for example, they look very similar to a very early developing human being because we're all chordates. Okay, so this goes way back. This goes way back in development. Read over this. I'm not going to test you on the development of the brain from fetal to adult. Okay, so this I'm not going to test you on this. All right, so here's the brain stem. So this is the part of the brain that includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Okay, so if we looked really close at that. A pyramid is also a collection of cell bodies too, as are olives, pyramids and olives. Okay. So this is the anterior view. So we're looking at the brain straight on from the face, right? So the rest of the brain would be right, like, it would be bigger than this, but it would be like right here. Okay? All right, so how do I get rid of that now? I don't want that on there. I'll just leave it. All right, so here you can see the infundibulum. So the pituitary gland would be coming off of that. Right here, this looks like up here, that's the optic nerve right there. Interthalamic adhesion right there. You see that? So the interthalamic adhesion connects right and left thalami. Right? So there's your thalamus. If we go back, your thalamus, remember your thalamus, would be right here. Okay? That's your thalamus right there. So this view is with all this stuff taken off the top. Okay, so that's your thalamus. right there. There's your thalamus right there, but we're looking straight at it. So the interthalamic adhesion is just what it says, right? It adheres the thalami between them. Okay. So infundibulum, that's the stalk for the pituitary gland. Cerebral peduncle. So a peduncle is a narrowing of anything on a body. So for example, if you catch like a big tuna fish, right? So let's say you caught a big tuna fish. Here's a tuna, right? And its tail is like, here's this. This is a good picture of a tuna. It looks like a mahi, but there's a gill. It's smiling, and it's got an eye. There's a mahi. All right. So if you were to grab it right here, right, and hold it up for pictures, like that, right? That's a good hand right there. It's got a hook on it. You know, I mean, he had an accident, but he's got that hook now. But if you were to grab right there, that part of the fish right here, that's called the caudal peduncle. Caudal peduncle. So peduncle is just a narrowing, right? So the cerebrum's up here, and here's where the cerebrum narrows down. So that's the cerebral peduncle right there. Okay, and then here's the pons. So all of these yellows, those are your cranial nerves coming off of it. So here's your pons, and then we'll talk a little bit, actually quite a bit, about the pyramids and olives, especially when we get into like the dorsal column medial lemniscal system, which is in the next chapter. So you're going to want to know where these structures are. These might be things like bonus on the practor. So, hey, do you know where a pyramid is, man? And you point to it. Okay. This one here, pyramidal decussation, right there. So this word here, decussation, means crossing over, right? So in other words, the nerves or the tracts, this is where they cross over like this, right? They cross over, and then they continue on their way. So that's decussation. Okay, so now this is a posterolateral. So that means you're looking at it from the back, but it's turned towards the side a little bit, right? So this is posterior, and then this is lateral. So it's posterolateral view. Okay, so now we're looking at it from the back, but it's not facing us directly. So there's the thalamus, a pineal gland. The pineal gland, so this regulates the sleep cycle, the pineal gland. And then this right here, what does that say? Midbrain. So that should say corpora quadrigemini right there. Midbrain. That's midbrain. What's up? Okay. So let's see. Yeah. So corpora quadrigemini literally means four bodies, four twin bodies. And so there's four bodies here. So right and left, you've got the superior and inferior colliculi, right? So here's a superior colliculus here. And then there's a superior colliculus here. Inferior colliculus here. And then another inferior colliculus here. So this superior colliculus, this is responsible for visual reflexes. Visual reflexes. So if you hear a loud noise and your eyes turn towards it, that's your superior colliculus doing its job. Okay? Inferior colliculus, so these are auditory reflexes. These are auditory reflexes. For example, well, I guess I misspoke there. So superior colliculus is visual reflexes. So if you see a bright light flash, your eyes turn towards it. Okay? And the way to remember which one of these is which is, I feel like vision is superior over hearing. Right? So if I was going to lose one, I'd rather lose my hearing. Right? So vision is superior. So that's the superior colliculus. Okay? So if I saw a bright light flash, my eyes would turn towards it. Okay? That's a visual reflex. That's superior colliculus. Inferior colliculus, I misspoke. Inferior colliculus would be like a loud sound. Whoa, you jump, you turn towards it. That's auditory reflexes. Auditory. Okay? So inferior colliculus, that's auditory reflex. That's an ear right there, as you can plainly see. And then superior colliculus, those are visual reflexes. Okay? Those are eyeballs. Okay? Those are visual reflexes.